Brought to you from Melbourne, Australia, this is the Badminton Podcast, a community for badminton players by badminton players, where we talk badminton, celebrate local heroes, interview players from all walks of life, and push you to grow as a player and a person. Introducing your hosts, Jeff and Henry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Badminton Podcast. The podcast by badminton players, for badminton players, fans, officials, and everyone out there who loves badminton, because that's what we do. We love badminton, and that's why we're doing this. My name's Jeff.
And I'm Henry.
And we're the co-founders of Volant. We're proudly providing the world with the world's most versatile badminton apparel. Like I said, we're here because we love badminton and we want to build our badminton community by introducing you to and learning from guests from all walks of life, whether they're professional badminton players, former professional badminton players, social players, and all of the like, because we do believe that everyone has something to offer, and we just really want to make a group of people and a community that really loves badminton and shares all of our ideas with each other. So I'm really excited to introduce our next guest. Sorry, I won't be doing it, but Henry will be doing it, and we're really lucky to have him on. So I'm really hope that you are looking forward to this episode.
Thanks, Jeff. So our guest today has a CV that, if properly delivered, would span most of this podcast. So instead, we'll keep it simple and hope that we can do him some form of justice. He was a former world number 6 badminton player, winning European and Commonwealth Games medals. In Ireland, he oversaw the badminton organisation's transformation from one of insolvency to the leading small to medium national sports governing body as the CEO, or Chief Executive Officer, for 4 years. He championed revenue growth, increased participation rates, and the development of a new badminton centre during his term. Prior to this, he was a digital specialist for Gravity, part of the K3 group, where he project managed large integrated information and communication technologies and advised on e-commerce, digital marketing, and social media strategy. So where is he now? He is the current Chief Executive Officer at Squash Australia and continues his involvement at high levels through the High Performance Commission at Badminton Europe and Institute of Directors. He's also the Chair of Performance of Badminton Europe and oversees their World Training Centre in Denmark.
I said, there's different structures and different ways of doing things. I don't think it's not black or white. I think different things can work. But the key thing is people. So if you've got really good quality people implementing, it will work. If you've got a better structure, a better strategy, it'll work better. But if you've got the perfect strategy, the perfect program with the wrong person delivering it, it won't work. And being able to identify those factors and being able to reflect on that is pretty, it's the job of the CEO. So it's a pretty key part of that role.
His name is Richard Vaughan. Welcome onto the podcast, Richard.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
So we know that you're in Australia right now, so you have migrated. So where are you based at the moment?
Yeah, so pretty much the last 5 years been based in Brisbane. So came over for the role with Squash Australia, and their office was Brisbane based. And we've been here since.
So tell us what you think of Australia so far, Richard.
Myself and family, we love Australia. I was lucky enough to be here as a player, and lucky enough to travel all around the world. And we both feel for the family in particular, it's the best location with, especially Brisbane, the weather, the lifestyle. But we're both able to do what we love in terms of work as well. So it's a perfect combination.
Yeah, and Richard, I believe we met first maybe in 2006, I think.
Yeah, around that time, yeah.
I think it was around that time. You were in Australia quite a bit, and then I was over in Wales as well, and we were playing. And that was that. When did you actually finish up playing professionally?
2008. My career was kind of sidetracked by a couple of big hip injuries. I had a big surgery when I was 18, 19, and then I had another one in about 2005. So I was kind of on the comeback trail in that period, trying to build my ranking up, because one of the pains of injuries, you lose your world ranking. It takes a year to kind of build things back up again. So this is similar for lots of the top players, especially in single events. That's all part of, from a system point of view, of managing that. I think in terms of my day job here, the playing background and understanding is pretty valuable in the sport context.
Yeah, completely understand. And I know Jeff understands as well, having a hip surgery himself recently. But just to take a step back a bit, I mean, we know you've been a professional player. We know you've been world number 6 in the past, but want to just go back a bit and just cover your badminton journey, really. So how did you get started? What's your story?
Like lots of players, I think I started quite young. I was generally quite good at lots of sports. Loved badminton. So it was kind of Welsh national champion at 8, under 12. But, there's lots of good young talent in every country. And I guess it was through my family, but I think it's really important that you kind of love what you do. You can't be forced into any sport. So it was really preferring badminton over other sports, especially around the 15, 16 mark. So I was European number 1 junior. So I had a big operation, big setback when I was 17, 18. But I was able to come back and qualify for the Sydney Olympics within 12 months for Britain. We had quite a strong team at that point as well, with Darren Hall and Peter Knowles. So that competition was tough, but really beneficial to me. And I guess peaked in my career around that phase the next 4 or 5 years. But then I had another big hip operation based on the first one, and sort of coming back after that. But as Jeff might know, it's difficult after hip operations because they leave a wear and tear, especially with a high volume of training. So I guess in that period, in terms of coaches, I was lucky enough, because I was from Wales, I had to look after myself pretty much. There was no team. I was part of a British team for about 2 months before the Olympics only. So I had to find my own way, and I was able to work with some really good coaches. So there was a good Korean coach in the UK called Lee Jae-bok when I was 15 to say 20. Then I lived in and out of Denmark between 20 and 25, training at Brøndby, the national centre, with both Lin and Zhang, the Chinese coaches, and Paul Eric. But my main issue was the period of time I was actually fit against that period of time I was injured. So I was really lucky to work with some real good coaches in that period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can really resonate and empathize with you with the hip, because it's never quite the same, even though it's meant to be better structurally and repaired. I don't know, it just feels stiff, especially on some days, especially after big training loads.
Yeah.
And I know Michelle Lee, who's currently competing, work top 10 level at the moment, and she's had a similar hip operation, and she had a tricky journey back to returning to her best form as well. So it's definitely a huge setback.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Same for anybody with injuries. They're all different, but they can be annoying, especially if you get them at a young age, and then you've got to have them throughout their career. So, as I said, it's something high performance systems need to kind of factor into the development.
Yeah, and Richard, what I really admire about your story is that you didn't really have, like you said, Wales didn't really have a much of a national setup or centre that supported you, and a lot of your training was self-driven. How did you do that at such a young age to find that motivation? Of course, it was important that you had a good coach at the time, but how did you do it? Because nowadays it's very, very difficult to get to that kind of level without having a team or support team around you and people to spar with. So how did you do it?
It is difficult. I think for me, I always like the physical aspect of sport. So, the one thing everybody can take care of is the physicality piece, because you can do that away from the court. So I was lucky enough to have an institute of sport near me, very similar in Australia to the State Institutes. And I was able to access that and get good support around testing and like the physical preparation piece. So it was really the badminton side that was hard work. I was lucky enough to have a few older good players around that I could kind of spar and play with. I said I was then able to find a very good Korean coach that I used to drive about 3 hours to for a session, and back, so 6 hours, 3 hours there, 3 hours back. And through that, I was able to develop plans and really organize my own training. So I might see the Korean coach once every 2 weeks. I was able to plan my own training then, the 2 weeks, and control that with, say, some of the older players that were for me at 15, 14 were good. It would have been Welsh international players, so same as the Australian players now, nationally. So top 100. It was really about me working things out for myself and being able to construct the training, which I did well, but obviously not perfect. So it was a two-sided coin, really. So one, it was really good for my personal development to be able to do that. But B, I probably at 14 or 15, you only know so much. The training was only as good as I could make it. You go to Denmark, for example, and you see the quality of the training there because of the extensive knowledge and culture. It's really good. I think overall benefited, but it was far from perfect.
Yeah, I'm sure it really helped to have that fierce competition around as well when you're so young to help lift you. And you briefly talked about having loved the sport, and I feel that that's really important for us as part of the Badminton podcast. We're here because we love the sport. Is there something in particular about badminton itself that you really love or that has driven you to basically center your life around it? And obviously now through another racket sport, but you're still heavily involved in badminton as well. Is there something about badminton that you just really love?
I like all sports. For my pains, I'm a big football fan. I sport Cardiff City, so I used to play like junior football, junior rugby. So I like all sports, but I think for badminton, it's probably the combination of everything. So the physicality piece, but the skill and the tactical elements, and probably the fact that you're kind of self-reliant on your own. I probably find team events too easy. You're only one piece in 15 or 11. I love playing them, but to a certain extent, they're too easy because there's not enough to keep me busy. I probably carry that across to my day job now. So CEO, you're doing 6 people's jobs and you have 300% volume of work, which I like. And if I had a role that was normal, should we say, I'd be less fulfilled. So I think it's a combination of all those factors, which is hard to find in a sport that has, like I said, the physicality, the tactical all in one. So I think that makes badminton a great sport.
It sounds like you find peace in chaos from what you just said. Just to go back a bit, you said you used to play junior football. Just to clarify that you mean football is in soccer, right? Not AFL.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. What do you think of AFL now that you're in Australia?
Oh, God, I'm relatively new to it. Obviously, you see it in the UK once every week on Casual Sport or something. So, it's kind of known. It looks like a great sport to participate in. But again, probably going back to my preference of individual sports. As an individual, I wouldn't have enough to do. But it looks like a great sport to play and have fun.
And do you barrack for anyone in the AFL?
Our high performance center is right next door. We share our high performance unit with squash with the Suns.
Okay, sure.
So I have to say the Suns, but I know they haven't done so well. So I've been a few of their matches. They got a great setup, really professional. So the professionalism of the AFL is remarkable for a domestic sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Top notch.
National sport, it would be great. Similar to GAA in Ireland, but another level up. GAA in Ireland still really amateur. So there's not the professionalism around the training and the setup, where the AFL, from knowing the setup and even down to the financial director and how they go about business is, a real professional business, which is why they're successful.
Just to go back there, Richard, what's GAA stand for?
Gaelic Athletics Association. So it's it's hurling and a mix of different sports. One of them similar to AFL. So.
And just a last quick question, just about the sporting part of it, Richard. Are you encouraging your kids to play?
I was. We let them do wherever they want, basically. So both my wife and I love sports. So there's just as broader a range. I've been on the badminton court a few times already. I've been to the tennis. I think they've been to about 20, 25 sports already. So really, whatever they enjoy playing, we both think badminton's great. But again, if you can do well in any sport, you've got to love doing it yourself, not be kind of forced into it. Really, it's a pretty key principle. So they're both very sporty, in fairness. They're quite tall for their age, etc., etc. So I'm sure both of them will be involved in one sport or another.
Yeah, sure. And Richard, so moving on from your professional career and all the sports that you love, and moving into basically when you stopped playing professionally after 2008. So how long was it after that? Did you start at Badminton Ireland and start to turn those things around there? Because actually a couple of weeks ago, I was speaking to Sam McGee, and he will be another episode. So he'll be another guest on the podcast. And he was saying that you put in some really great things in Badminton Ireland, lots of changes. It didn't make everyone happy there. And that's what happens when you make big change. Not everyone's going to be happy, but you've really helped turn the sport around. And so I'm just really curious to see how you got into Badminton Ireland and what you did there.
Yeah, so look, as most things, a bit of luck and different factors. So after my hip operation in 2005, I basically lost my funding in UK. So I wasn't funded from 2005. Then to be able to fund my badminton, I did a number of things. I was obviously studying, but I had my own academy in the UK, junior coaching, which was quite successful. So I had a lot of European players there. I did some contract work for the WAL Federation. So I was at some point the Africa lead coach. So I used to go to Africa, run camps and train with them and advise them on qualifying for the Olympics, for example. So I did partly Beijing, London, Rio. And I also did some work for Badminton Europe as well in terms of coaching and development. And I also started working in Gravity, which is a e-commerce digital marketing company. So I basically did all those things to generate income to be able to play and get to the tournaments, etc. With the flexibility of traveling and everything else, because the hardest thing with playing full time is travel, the amount of time you're away, and that makes uni and everything else very hard compared to a sport, say like rowing or rugby, where you're in the same place every day, local, and the training's kind of around. Badminton, tennis, etc. Because of the travel, it's really hard to align study. So yeah, it was really mixing and matching all those things. Then when I finished playing in 2008, kind of consolidated them down a little bit more, so stopped playing, but kept the WAL Federation role and working full time for the digital agency. And I guess all of those skills then give me the right mix for the role at Ireland when that came up in 2011, I think it was. So yeah, a little bit of luck that came along. It was also very close. I was Cardiff based, so it was Dublin's 30 minutes flight. So about as close a city as you're going to get from Cardiff. And yeah, it was just the right type of opportunity.
Yeah. So once you got into Badminton Ireland, what were the things that you started to, I guess, initiate once you got on board?
Well, when I went there, they were pretty much insolvent. So they had no staff. They'd overspent before Ireland had bottomed out with the economy, which was bad in terms of there was no budget. Good in terms of there was an opportunity to kind of reset and start anew as such. And Ireland's always had a lot of participation. So there's always been a lot of people playing there, but until, say, Chloe and Scott Evans, they'd never had any top players. No, they've never had a system per se. Even though they had so many players and quite a lot of money, they never transferred that into actual constant success. And look, in fairness to Scott, really good talented player, probably a one-off unique. It wasn't because of the system, it was because of his talent. Same with Chloe to a certain extent. And like I said, they'd always been very, very well funded the decade before. So that was coming to the end and there was no money. But I was lucky enough to have a really good chair, professional chair, an okay board, who really looked at it like a business and the chair wanted to bring in a good CEO and an operational team that were capable of running the organization and creating the structures longer term for the sport to succeed. So the board were very hands-off, basically allowed me to do a strategic review with all the stakeholders, which took about 6 months, create a new strategy. And then that strategy is really just best practice, kind of logical things. But that isn't always as easy as it sounds, because you frequently find in sports that are smaller without substantial income, there's a lot of stakeholders getting involved. The board are really passionate, getting involved in operations, possibly don't have the skill sets for modern day, digital, legal, etc. So basically the chair made it easy for me to do a good job. And I do think in a lot of sports, it's quite easy to do a good job, really, because it's pretty logical. You can see who's doing a good job and copy them, and there's best practice. But being allowed and able to do that is a different thing with stakeholder politics, board involvement, etc. So I really do think that the chair was probably key. In terms of the strategic plan, it was really focused around key concepts and participation, like school programs. We had to put in place a new coach education system because the old one was a little bit defunct. So we ended up piloting all the WAL Federation coach education and adopting that, and we got paid to do it as well. We piloted the shuttle time project for schools, which is a big success for BWF. In high performance, we had a central high performance system. It's really focused on creating a culture of performance. Obviously, bringing in a good coach, having a good location, good support services. But previously, players were allowed to do pretty much wherever they liked, wherever they were. And that tends to lead to a kind of a lifestyle culture, where through no fault of their own, the players do what they want when they want. They don't really work on what they need to when they need to. And that culture piece was probably the biggest success in the 4 years, because when I left, the players were looking after themselves quite well, and they recognized the change. And, there was no major issues despite quite a diverse group. And the same with the staff and the coaches. So you're trying to bring the same performance culture into the operational team. So, for example, we didn't have huge budgets, so we had to largely work with graduates and develop them over the 4 years. So one of the interns I brought in 2012 is now the CEO of Badminton Ireland. So again, I think that shows a good development of him personally. Obviously, he's worked really hard and so good skills. But there are a number there. Dan McGee is the performance director now that started in 2011 with me. So the same high performance and the operational team developing that performance culture piece was probably the biggest success. And that allowed players like Nat Nguyen to come through. I worked with Nat when he was 12. He was obviously a really good talent, but there's so many good talents around. The key thing is to have a system in place and a culture in place that allows them to maximize themselves. And I think we've done that. We did that really well in Ireland.
Yeah, sure. And everything here sounds like it's super important, from building grassroots to the schools and then looking at the national players and the national system as well. How long did this take to implement? Like, how long was the process before you could step back and say, hey, look, we've really made a good change here and things are looking on the up?
As I said, Ireland was a bit unique because there were a lot of people playing. It was just totally fragmented and there was no structure. We were lucky to have a product that we use from the BWF, and that's why we used it, because it would have taken another year to develop the program otherwise. So it probably took about 1 year to bring the system in, the second year to train up tutors, coaches, teachers. So by year 3, we were seeing some really good results, which have continued through to today. Like I said, we had a network of clubs for those players to go to. So the participation levels in Ireland, I think, are the second or third highest in Europe per capita.
Oh, really?
So I think the highest is Iceland or something, but Ireland was the third. So again, quite a big participation base, but we increased it through that period, and I think it's still pretty strong to today. And the good or bad thing about that participation base is it's very social as well, which I think is good. It's not just high performance. It's a very strong club focus and structure. And again, the good thing was my chair, who was very good, was a real social level player. Didn't really have any interest in high performance, and he wanted to create the structures in place for sustainability and for those lower level players. So we brought in new competitions. We brought in a new grading system, new national competitions for those lower grades and for those lower clubs. So instead of being a triangle structure in terms of competitions or the level, it's really more rectangular, and there's something throughout. So we did a lot in high performance, but we really put on a lot of competitions or focus on the lower medium level players, which I guess who are your future administrators, your future coaches, and that was a big focus for him, which I guess counterbalanced my more high performance background, and in the end created a really nice system.
Yeah, it's great how you engage the sort of the lower level players, but that social piece as well, because I guess that's how we're going to build the sport as well. We can't just focus on those high performance professional athletes. In order for us to grow the sport, we need to be engaging all players at all levels, if possible. And I guess it's fantastic to see what you've contributed and what you've done for Badminton Ireland. And if you were to look back, is there anything in particular that you've learnt from that experience that you could impart as wisdom to us and our audience?
Oh, look, I think it's just reinforcing the importance of that culture piece. Probably starts with the board. Obviously filters down into policies and the staff and the high performance team and everything you do, really. I think that is pretty key. It's an easy thing to say, but it does resonate then into the strategy that you have and all different areas that you work. I think we did that really well. then looking back, there's not much I really changed with Ireland. There was just probably one or two staff I would have liked to have kept or got, but we just didn't have the budget at the time, which is, we kind of increased the budget about 10 to 15% year on year. So there was reasons for that. So coming into Australia, really just, it's reconfirming the different pieces that worked and trying to, in my current role, transfer them across the squash.
Yeah, Richard, like you said before, I think a lot of the things that you've talked about are, look, they're common sense, and you think that, they're the right things to do. And with the culture piece, yes, it's easy to say, but all of them, they're just not that easy to implement and get everyone on board. And I know that you said the board in Badminton Ireland was quite supportive of change and doing these things. But what do you find is the biggest roadblock for countries like Australia or New Zealand or the less developed badminton nations? What do you feel is the biggest roadblock in them upgrading their systems and increasing participation and making badminton the biggest sport in their respective countries?
Yeah, look, I think there's two factors probably. As I said, the systems piece and best practice, I think, is relatively easy. As in, you can see what happens around the world, you can copy, etc., etc. So operationally, it's really the delivery of the strategy in the piece. So if you go back to Ireland, we had the high performance center. On paper, everything was great, but we also brought in kind of a world-class coach. And then we also brought in world-class support services. And then we had a managing process around that, which we knew was weak. And in my position, I was able to help make sure that was world-class. If we brought in an average coach with average support people and we'd left a more junior manager manage the system, it wouldn't have worked. So in high performance or in the rest of the business, subconsciously, people know when something's a quality product and when it's not. So it's really making sure that you have real quality in each of those areas. And if it isn't, you need to know it isn't, and then create something to mitigate around that. Obviously, when you don't have huge budgets, there's always something that isn't perfect, but you need to know it's not perfect, not pretend it is, and kind of mitigate around that. I think the other piece then again is the board empowering the operational team to deliver. If you've got a board constantly interfering, then the operational team can't deliver. If they're constantly interfering, they're either not doing their director roles properly or they have no confidence in the operational team. So either way, something needs to change there. So they're probably the two biggest things. So the directors undertaking their roles properly and really the quality implementation of the strategic plan and programs. I said there's different structures and different ways of doing things. I don't think it's not black or white. I think different things can work. But the key thing is people. So if you've got really good quality people implementing, it will work. If you've got a better structure, a better strategy, it'll work better. But if you've got the perfect strategy, the perfect program with the wrong person delivering it, it won't work. And being able to identify those factors and being able to reflect on that is pretty, it's the job of the CEO. So, it's a pretty key part of that role.
That's great, Richard. So now that you've contributed so much to Badminton Ireland, you've managed to create that culture, you've managed to put the right people in the right places. Why Squash Australia? How come you suddenly jumped from badminton, something you love, something you have such a rich history with? How come you came to Australia and joined Squash Australia as the CEO?
Yeah, so I guess when I was at the island, I did a bit of consultancy work for a few agencies. So one of those was putting in place a badminton system in Qatar. So basically, that agency followed up with me when the squash role became available in Australia. I'd done the island role for 4 years by then, and after 3 or 4 years, I was probably looking at taking another step. So obviously, my wife and I already thought Australia was a lovely place, and squash was a bigger budget, obviously a bigger country, a big challenge. Squash outside the Olympics, etc., declining, and Australia's declining in terms of level as well, compared to 20, 30 years ago when they had so many world champions. So it was always going to be a challenging role. As I said, I like challenges, so we decided to have the change of environment, and we've loved being here since.
Yeah, sure. And do you find that the challenges in Squash Australia are similar to the ones that you faced at Badminton Ireland?
Yeah, they're pretty much all the same. They've got the added complication of not being in the Olympics, which creates. So I think squash
funding as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Everything in squash is harder than badminton. So if you make an average grant application, you need to get that extra 10 or 20% over because you're not in the Olympics. Because the Olympics, are you in the Olympics, or do you fit the brand alignment of us with Olympic sports, is on every grant application. Everything from infrastructure to participation, obviously high performance. So you've got to be able to create a more compelling case. And for any sport that's in the Olympics, it kind of shows the decline of squash probably over the 30 years, shows the importance of the Olympics, and why sports need to adapt and change to make sure they stay in the Olympics. But I said, I think we've built on top of Ireland and what we learned there, and developed a really nice system. So our budget's increased from about 1.4 to 3.6 million in the 3 or 4 years. Staff's gone from about 2 to 17. Opened the National Centre on the Gold Coast last year. We topped the medal table at Gold Coast 18. We won 8 World Championship medals last year. But despite all of that, there's lots of challenges. So it's a little bit like swimming upstream.
Awesome.
You can do really, really well, but the moment you don't, you can go twice as far back quite quick. Where Olympic sports aren't quite like that. So working in squash kind of makes you realize that, I guess, and the challenges of in and out of the kind of the Olympic stream. And obviously you've got commercial sports then to the side. But so it's been a good learning experience as well.
And so would you say your vision for Squash Australia is to try and get squash into the Olympics?
Well, yeah, we've definitely been one of the biggest supporters of that. So unfortunately last year they've missed out on Paris 24. And look, it's hard for squash, in fairness, because I think it's a great sport, and probably, there's a number of sports that are more suspect in the Olympics already. I won't name them, but they involve horses. But it's built on historic factors, and now it's a commercial entity. And unfortunately for squash, although the participants generally are from the same base of people that play tennis, badminton, athletics, they're from sports. And the Olympics aren't really interested in sports now. They want new audiences. They've already captured the sport audience, and now they want the entertainment audience. So that's why breakdancing was added. Esports will come in at some point. They're all bringing new audiences. So unfortunately for squash, I think as a sport, it's got very little chance of coming in unless something comes out. I don't see that happening. So again, it's a good warning for the smaller Olympic sports of the benefit and the podium that the Olympics provides them.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never thought of it that way. And I guess we've always been privileged with badminton that it is an Olympic sport. And I guess funding is always an issue for us. But then on the flip side, having that perspective and seeing what squash has to do with. Now, is there any vendetta between, say, squash players or the squash staff or people in squash compared to, do they have any vendettas against, say, badminton or table tennis or those kind of sports and think, why aren't we in, they're in?
No, I think as a team, within Squash Australia as a team, players and coaches and the operational team, we understand the environment. So, again, we're kind of open, good communication around that, and we just know we need to be better. Probably within the stakeholders in the sport, they will be. And again, it's quite a complicated mix of reasons. So in fairness to a lot of the end players, they probably don't understand all of those complexities. And some of these things go back 30 years, the reasons why and why not. So yeah, it's very hard for the end users to understand. I think anybody can understand that in any sport. Some of these reasons on the surface are crazy, but history, backstories, and commercial reasons why.
Yeah, and given your success in Badminton Ireland, I do hope that you are able to implement a similar story for Squash Australia here as well. Now, I guess moving on from squash and back into badminton, this is the Badminton podcast after all. As an Australian now, what similarities and differences do you see with badminton in Ireland versus Australia and even in Wales?
Well, I think in all those countries, it's a more minority sport. I think Australia, I don't know badminton in Australia that well. I've just been too busy with family and squash role, plus with my European kind of role. I've tried to separate it a little bit so it's not a conflict. But there seems to be a huge potential in Australia with different demographics, like Ireland, really. It is quite similar, I think. Like I said, I'm not too sure how great those structures are throughout and at the lower levels in particular. I think there's quite a lot of similarities to Ireland in that context. Wales didn't really have so many people playing. Ireland had a lot more potential. So Wales was similar, but even less, even harder as such. So the environment's similar. It's obviously a much bigger country, which creates complications. But so you've got to have programs in place around that, and that's where the culture piece becomes so important. But it's really going back to that good governance of a good board with the right skill sets, governing and staying out of operations, building a good operational team that understand the sport, that make quality decisions and have the right strategy. You can literally pretty much apply that anywhere and it works well. So I think quite a lot of similarity actually between Australia and Ireland in that context.
Sure thing, Richard. Now, moving on just from the sport part of it, but more your career and your role as a CEO. I'm sure there are a lot of listeners out there and a lot of my friends actually who say, look, one day I want to be a CEO of a company, one day I want to be CEO of something, because there's a lot of prestige and there's lots of authority and status symbol recognition if you are a CEO. What's it really like though? Is there something that, is there a myth that you can bust or something that you can tell about being a CEO to the audience that maybe thinking, hey, I want to be a CEO one day?
Oh, look, it's kind of a mix of all of that. And to be honest, every CEO role is a bit different depending on the scale of the sport. And as I said, important to have a good chair and a good board because, that makes the role totally different. So it's hard. It's very hard to compare one CEO role with another. But I think generically, there's substantial high volume pieces of work. There's more and more need to have good soft skills, so people skills, a lot of politics in any of the roles. And I think you have to have a passion for the sport in particular, because without that, it's very hard with the hours and the politics to really have the sight on that end-to-end vision and strategy. Obviously, you need the background knowledge and education, but I think there are smaller factors. It's that passion, drive, ability to cover quite a substantial work and deal with the politics are all key. And obviously having an understanding family around you to be able to do that, because it's not a normal role. My wife's a consultant doctor. She's in the hospital 7 to 6, but then when she's home, there's nothing. Works extremely hard between 7 and 6. We're CEO and a bit like sport coach roles as well. They can be 24/7 with stuff happening every night, weekends, holidays, Christmas Day. And it's being able to manage that, because that will happen, but you've got to be able to manage that. And again, that's where a good chair and the board really help. And as I said, every CEO role is different depending on those factors.
Yeah, and Richard, I know just before you talked about background knowledge. In your experience as a CEO of a sports, what's your educational background and what would you suggest to someone who wants to get into this kind of position as to the knowledge or the education they should be looking at?
Yeah. Look, I think that's always changing and it's getting expectations again harder and harder all the time. So CEO roles, the level of capability in CEO roles every 10 years has jumped significantly. If you look around a role 10 years ago to today, international and national. So for me, I said I was really lucky to get injured all the time. So when I was injured, I studied. I did undergraduate so I did all my high school education and I did international economics and politics. Then in that period around the 2006 and 8, I needed to get a scholarship. So I did a master's in sport development education. Then the year after, I did an MBA business. And then since then, I've done leadership courses at Melbourne Business School and recently with the Australian Institute of Company Directors, which is a really, really good week course. So I think the education knowledge piece is a prerequisite. Everybody has to have that. And it's a bit of a constant need to keep upskilled on best practice, especially around the governance and finance and director responsibility pieces. And as I said, it is a prerequisite that I think you have to have in a CEO role now, and the standards are a lot higher now than 10 years ago. Yeah.
And as an MBA graduate, I mean, do you feel that with the current educational landscape and work landscape that, as a CEO, you require something like an MBA, or is the skills that you learn within a business or within whatever company or life experiences you have can be enough for that?
I think it's good to have. If you did an MBA, could you be a CEO? No. it's only one small part, but it gives you a nice core understanding of the business from legal, marketing, finance, org structure, strategy. So it just ticks a number of core boxes, best practice. So if being a good CEO is made up of 100 things, it's a nice solid 20 things. So if you didn't have those or sound knowledge across those, you possibly wouldn't be as an effective a CEO without business life experiences that ticked all those boxes somewhere else. So for me, I came with more of a sporting background, education background. So those core pieces were important for me. But what I've been able to do as CEO with just on the MBA? No, there's so many more things as well. But they give me a really good start. So I did like up to a level of a master's in finance through the course, and those kind of core basics were really good base knowledge information for me, and probably a prerequisite for everybody in that role.
Yeah, sure. And Richard, you probably say that everything so far has been really important to your success and your knowledge at the moment. But if you were going to say maybe 2 or 3 of them, of the most important things that you feel were for you right now, so in terms of education, what would they be? The MBA? What else would they be?
Oh, look, I think if you ask me 2 or 3 overall, I'd probably say being an Olympic athlete and everything associated with that is pretty irreplaceable. So, I was lucky enough to work with some of the world's best coaches, some of the world's best players, gold medalists at the Olympics, experienced the ups and downs of playing, winning, the tactical piece, dealing with injuries, working in high performance systems. So all of that gives you a really good subconscious understanding of what's good and what's not. So what does that mean? In terms of badminton, if I'm looking to hire coaches or PDs, I can pretty much work out straight away if somebody's good or not. Subconsciously, obviously in my head, I put together from all my own experiences and discussions, and there's a logic for that. But even going back to the European Training Center, I think that's one of the strengths I kind of bring. I'm able to put in all the right things. We don't make mistakes. So I think that badminton experience is pretty irreplaceable because you can't buy that. If you're a player in the Danish national system working with 2 Chinese coaches and Paul Eric every day, day in, day out, you kind of get inside knowledge. Where if you go there as an external coach to shadow, you get 10%. People aren't as open. So I think fundamentally that player Olympic experience is valuable. And I think that's why high performance athletes, if they've got their head screwed on, so to speak, are really employable because they have that background with that, the motivation, the discipline, and everything that comes with that. And I know at Squash, we've got a program where we really try to help retiring athletes in terms of getting that background education, mentoring in that transition, because that's generally not in place anywhere. Because they have so many good life skills, they are missing different development blocks because they've been in sport for so long. So we try to help with that transition. And even within our organization, we've employed a number of players retiring or injured. And it's been nice to see one of those was Zach Alexander, who then got over his injury and went back for the Commonwealth Games and won a gold medal. So yeah, I think that's pretty essential. And as I said, the MBA and these different blocks are prerequisites. You have to have them. But the elite kind of Olympic performance piece is something you can't buy. And I know a lot of parents are concerned about their children playing badminton and not being a success and the importance of studying everything else. And logically, yeah, it makes sense. But like I said, you get so much more from the journey of being an athlete all around in terms of your human skills and your development skills. You can always go back, or you can always do the education piece alongside if you're disciplined. I've seen so many people stop playing that study, have a good degree, and then have pretty average jobs after. Where you see a lot of people in sport. I think Denmark's great. Anders Boström, Rasmussen are all doctors. My wife used to play; she's a doctor. There's so many good case studies, as yourself, Jeff, in Australia. So there should be a lot more focus on those success stories, because I think being a success as an athlete isn't really winning a gold medal or an event. It's about success as a person longer term, and winning a gold medal, winning Olympic Games is just part of that. So it's keeping that balanced approach, and that's something we try to bring into our high performance program. So we try to encourage all the athletes to study. They're training full time from 18. Before, they were literally told they shouldn't study and they have to play full time. Even in the British system now in badminton, they're told that. Where we really think that they should study and they should have something around their squash as well.
Yeah, I completely agree that the high performance culture and competitive environment of professional athletes can really translate into the professional life of these people as well. I want to ask you one more thing, Richard, and it's a question that I really like listening to on another podcast that I really like. And the question is, how much of your success do you attribute to skill and how much do you attribute to luck?
It depends how you define skill, really. So I think there's a couple of factors there as well, and that's the kind of the mental side and the we started this discussion in the UK quite a lot with one of my old coaches, because you see so many talented young players. So the discussion is normally around what talent is, and talent's the ability to have skill, but be able to focus that over a long period of time to get positive outcomes. So I think everybody that plays badminton to a good level has a level of skill. Some are exceptional, some are learned. So, you can learn. If you've got a good coach, you can probably learn 30-40%. And I've seen some really good players that was all learned skills. But then you need to have a good coach and a good system. And if you take somebody like a Nat Leon in Ireland, he's very talented at 12. He was exceptional. So I was lucky enough to work with him. And he's kind of learned some new skills, but that's really natural skill. And he's been able to apply it for longer term success. And look, there's always elements of luck, per se, in terms of, if you look back to Nat's case, he was lucky I was CEO. He was lucky we brought in a world-class coach and developed a culture around him that allowed us to get extra funding, that allowed us to develop him. So all of those factors are in, but again, I wouldn't really see that's luck. It's important that players control their own careers and find their own path. So if Nat hadn't have had us there, it would have been harder. But he would have had to have gone and find a good coach and found avenues for funding, which makes it harder. But there's definitely an element of some players have more skill than others. But I think you can balance that out in terms of talent by working harder and applying those skills. And also, if you get somebody that does everything, like a Peter Gade before, some of the top Chinese players, then they're pretty exceptional. Yeah, I guess that's how we've looked at it in the past.
Yeah, fantastic, Richard. And so just wrapping up here, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on to the podcast, because I think we've really dug into some things that are really important from a fundamental level as to how sporting bodies can work and how they can be better. And then just that piece at the end when you talked about, say, your life experience being an athlete and then going and having a career outside of sport. And then you're saying about parents being worried about their children only playing sport initially. And I can't, it resonates so deeply with me, and I can't encourage that more in that, yes, being an athlete it's hard work, and you might not get the gold medal, you might not get the Olympic Games or the Commonwealth Games or whatever games you're looking for, but the road and the journey that you take to actually be the athlete and compete and train and do all those things, it really does grow you as a person, as well as the travel overseas and just learning about yourself. And there's nothing personally that I would give away to replace that, because I think that's really shaped the person I am today. So I really enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, and I just add there as well. I think that's where that culture piece, from what I've seen, that's where that culture piece is important. If parents can see there's a quality system with quality people and there's a positive culture, then I think they're more confident around the development of their children. If they don't see that culture and they don't see a world-class coach, they see poor behavior, poor culture, then they're probably understandably less confident in committing the children's time in that space. So I think that's where that culture piece, that quality piece is pretty essential around that sport and that high performance.
Yeah, great. Well, that's a great point to finish off of as well. So this brings us to the end of the podcast. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to Richard, who's come onto our podcast. We're very grateful to have him on. We thank everyone, all the support that they've given us so far. We will continue to push you to grow as a player and a person with special guests like Richard. So make sure that you keep sharing your love of the sport with everyone so that we can continue to show the world how incredible badminton is.
And if you find benefit from this podcast, make sure you do share it with your friends, family, and all the badminton community, because we really want to grow together as a group and as a big badminton family. If you want to get into contact with us, so myself, Jeff, or Henry at Volant, or the Badminton Podcast, you can connect with us via social media. So that's Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Our handle is Volantwear, VOLANTWEAR. We also just have a separate Instagram for our podcast, which is just the Badminton Podcast, no spaces. And finally, our website is www.volantwear.com, and you can connect with us on there as well.
And make sure you check out our clothes too.
And our blog and our YouTube videos and everything, because we're here because we really are trying to create something great for the badminton community, resources wise, and also just the sense of belonging and being part of, like I said, our badminton family.
All right, we'll see you at the next episode.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks.
This podcast was brought to you by Volantwear, the most versatile badminton apparel you'll ever own.